Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today to learn more about how to use CMS Merit and some of the new features of the tool we've introduced this year. My name is Meredith Eastman, and I am the Pre-Rulemaking Task Lead here at Patel. Before we dive into today's content, I did just want to cover a couple of housekeeping items. So your lines have been muted to minimize background noise during this presentation. This meeting is being recorded and will be uploaded to the CMS Pre-Rulemaking website for future viewing. I will say that if you're interested in background slides on CMS Merit, I'll refer you to the CMS Merit section of the Pre-Rulemaking Kickoff webinar slide deck, and we'll put a link to that slide deck in the chat. The main content for today's presentation will be in the screen sharing demonstration portion in a couple of minutes. Although your lines are muted, we do welcome questions. So please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation as they come up for you using the Q&A feature in WebEx. And so this slide shows you how to do that. You want to click on the Q&A icon in the lower right-hand corner of your screen and be sure to direct your questions to all panelists. And so again, you can ask your question at any point during the webinar, and we will address questions at the end. So as an overview of what I'll be presenting today, I'm going to start by describing what CMS Merit is and some of its defining features. Then I'm actually going to share my screen and I'll demonstrate some of the features and functionality of the tool. After I show off Merit, I'll review some help resources that are available to you. I will note that today's presentation and demonstration will focus on how to use CMS Merit from the measure submitter's perspective. CMS will hold a separate training for CMS staff and contractors who are engaged in the measure review process. So again, this is focused on the measure submitter's perspective. And we'll have time for questions at the end, as I noted. So what is CMS Merit? The full name of the tool is a bit of a mouthful. It's the CMS Measures Under Consideration Entry Review Information Tool. And it's the tool that measure developers use to submit their clinical quality and efficiency measures for consideration by CMS. In addition to being the tool to submit information about measures, CMS Merit also facilitates searches of measures from current and previous years, and it structures the workflow for CMS review of measures submitted to the MUC list. But again, here we're focusing on the submission process. CMS Merit opened for this year's pre-rulemaking cycle on January 28th, and it will remain open to accept measure submissions until 8:00 p.m. Eastern on Friday, May 20th. So that's an important deadline to keep track of. CMS Merit offers several features that have improved the MUC list entry and review process, including automatic completeness checks for required measure information, the ability to save partial information and return later to finish your submission, the ability to track your submission through the review process, and it uses an intuitive, easy to navigate interface that's based on the principles of human-centered design. So we've actually added several new features to Merit this year that I'm going to pay particular attention to in the demonstration. And these include the ability to click and open field level guidance, the ability to clone a measure from a previous measure submission, and we've implemented a simplified method for adding co-submitters. Now, if you'll just bear with me for 1 minute, I'm actually going to transition to sharing my screen, and I'll show you how to log in, and we will go from there. So please just give me 1 moment. Okay, hopefully you are seeing my screen. This is the login screen, and before I go ahead and log in, I wanted to point out a few things that you can do right from this login page. First, you can download a Word document of the MUC list submission fields in this MUC list template that contains all the fields that you'll see in Merit, as well as guidance on how to complete them. So if you wish, you can download that template draft your responses, work on your responses, and then copy and paste into Merit if that's easier for you. Although we note that Merit is easy to use and it does allow you to return later and finish a partial submission. Also on the login page is the Quick Start Guide, which is a PDF document that's going to cover most of the content I'm going to share with you today, but it's just a handy reference to have in writing to help orient you to the tool. So you can see the login for Merit requires a username, a password, and then two-factor authentication. If you need a Merit account, you can request one by going to this request account hyperlink here, and there'll be a brief form for you to fill out, and you'll be given a username and password and set up your two-factor authentication. So I'm going to go ahead and get my two-factor in here. We wait a moment for it to refresh. Okay. And now we are in the tool. So because I am not logging in for the first time here, this takes me directly to the My Submissions tab. If I had been logging in for the first time, there'd be two large cards right in the middle of the screen. A button to submit a new measure, and then another copy of that Word template that you can download if you wish to work on it offline before using the system. So there are two ways that I can start a measure submission. I can click on that big card that would be here the first time around, or I can click on this measure, submit a new measure in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. But rather than start a new measure, I'm actually going to open up a measure that I've previously created for the purposes of this demonstration. So you'll see a handful of measures here that I have going. These are just for demonstration purposes only, but here's where you would see any measures that you're working on. So I'm going to click on demonstration measure 1. And you see I have a few options. I have view full or edit. I'm going to go ahead and click edit. So this is the exact same page that you would see if you had clicked on submit measure after logging in, but here you can see that I've pre-populated some fields. And there are a couple of features that are used throughout the tool that I'm going to pause here and talk about here. So there are red asterisks after several of the fields. These red asterisks denote fields that are mandatory. So these fields must be completed in order for you to successfully submit your measure. These are fields that are used to enhance CMS's and the Measure Application Partnership's assessment of measures. And so you'll see throughout these red asterisks, and you'll need to pay particular attention to be sure that you complete them. After each field, regardless of whether or not there's a red asterisk, you will see this definition underneath. If I click on this definition, I get a pop-up with instructions for how to complete that field. So this is actually an improvement from last year. This you can actually move around on your screen to wherever is convenient for you, and it will actually stay on the screen as I type. So you don't have to juggle or toggle between multiple sources. You can just keep that definition on the screen while you're working on the field. And I will say that this guidance also appears in that Word template. So you'll find the same information here as you find in that Word document. I did want to mention about character limits. Unless otherwise noted, the default character length for any text field in Merit is 4,000 characters. So that should be plenty of space. And these text boxes here, they do expand as you type into them. So we have a couple of instances here where we have shorter text boxes, and that's denoted where applicable below the text box itself. So let's say I submitted a measure last year and it didn't make it on the muck list, but I've spent the last year conducting additional testing and refining the specification, and I'd like to resubmit. Do you need to start over completely from scratch? Well, I'm happy to say that you do not need to start over from scratch. We've introduced the ability to clone a previously submitted measure and update fields with any new information. So I'm going to show you how to do that now. I'm going to go back to my submission and I'm going to click on Submit a New Measure. You can see this pop up here. I have the option to submit a measure from scratch or submit from an existing measure. So for this demonstration, I'm going to clone a previous measure. So I'll choose this option. And it does take a minute to load the previous measures in the database. It's gathering all past muck measures. And so this text box will enable me to search by muck ID or measure title. Let's say the measure I wanted to resubmit is a patient-reported measure on cancer. I'll enter the keyword cancer. And let's go ahead and search for relevant measures. I'm sure there will be quite a few. So it will just take a minute to crunch those data. Great. So I can see my list here. And these are previous copies I've made. Here's one we want to start from. I'll start from this measure. Great, and you can see that it's added for me, this word copy at the end of the title to indicate that it's a copy of the original measure. And now I'm able to go ahead and edit the fields to update any information. I will say that the mucklist template fields have changed and evolved over time. So our system has done the best job it can to map old information to new fields. But when cloning a measure from the past, you really want to make sure that all of the information is complete and in the right place based on the current mucklist fields. Also, I'll note that any attachments that were associated with the previously submitted measure will not be brought forward in the clone copy. So you will need to attach any relevant updated documents, and we'll talk about how to do that in a few moments. So for now, though, I'm going to abandon this clone, and I'm going to go back to my submissions, and I'm going to go back to my demonstration measure. And I'm going to go back into edit and pick up where I left off. So I'll show you a couple of ways you can navigate through this tool as you're working through your submission. On the left navigation bar, you'll see the major sections of the tool. And some of these, where it's appropriate to expand, you can expand and see all the subsections laid out there. You can click between sections to navigate from section to section. But if you do that, please be sure to hit the save button before just clicking on a different section of the tool. I also recommend not using the back arrow of your browser without first clicking save, because that will put you at risk for losing the information you've input on that page. The other way to navigate sequentially through the tool is to use this save and continue button at the bottom. So that will save your information and then advance you to the very next page. I do encourage you to save early and often in CMS Merit to avoid losing information. There's a 15-minute automatic inactivity logout. So if you are inactive for 15 minutes, you will be automatically logged out of your session and you will lose any unsaved information. There is a 1-minute warning before this happens to sort of check to see if you're still there and if you want to continue your session. So you'll see if we look at this left navigation bar, a pencil icon. This shows any page where I have saved information. And you'll see that the page that I'm working on appears in bold text here on the left. And as you complete required information, you will see a green check appear next to sections that are completed. And so this kind of lets you know that you've completed all required fields in a given section, and it's a good progress check as you're moving through the tool. There are multiple question types in Merit, including these open text fields. We have checkboxes, we have drop downs, and we have radio buttons. So there's multiple question types you want to be aware of. And also there are some questions that will introduce new questions depending on the answers you provide. So for example, if I were to go to this characteristics section of the tool, and if I were to switch my answer from this question, is this measure in the CMS measures inventory tool? If I were to say, yes, it is, you can see that a series of sub questions have just appeared, some of which are required, as denoted by that red asterisk. So just be aware that your answers may yield additional follow-up questions. So let's talk about attachments. There's an attachments tab here over on the left. We'll navigate there. So you are encouraged to attach your measure information form. Or if your MIF is not available, you're welcome to attach other methodological documents. You have the opportunity to provide any attachments that are relevant for your submission using drag and drop functionality, or you can browse your computer. I'll drag an attachment over here so you can see how that works. And there is my MIF. And you can see here that once I've attached it, I have the opportunity to make a comment on it. I can change it, or I can delete the file that I've attached. So let's say, let me save that. Let's say I'm working on with a team of people, and we all want the ability to edit the information in CMS Merit that we're all working on together. If you'd like to add a co-submitter to your measure, you can do so by going to Steward and Submitter Information. And here, this is telling me who are the current submitters for this measure. To add another submitter, I simply use this drop down to identify my colleague. And then you have to click Add. And then I would save and continue to make sure that that co-submitter has been fully added and is able to work on the measure with me. A couple of things I need to emphasize here. The co-submitter must already have a CMS Merit account in order to even appear in that drop-down box. So anyone you want working on the measure with you, be sure to have them request an account from the login page on CMS Merit. It's also important to note that you will not receive a notification from the system if your co-submitter is simultaneously working on your measure. So you'll want to coordinate with one another offline to ensure that you're not overriding one another's changes in CMS Merit. So let's say I've gone through all of the pages here, provided information, I've have my attachments. I think I'm ready to submit. I'll go to the review and submit page. And I'm going to have CMS Merit actually check to verify that I have completed all the information. By pressing that check submission for error. Okay, it looks like I have missed a field. And so I can navigate to this missing information by clicking on this hyperlink here or by following this red triangle. I'm actually going to go up here. See, it's in measure information. And I'm able to now provide my measure description, which I overlooked. Great. And now I'm going to save and continue. Actually, I think I can just submit from this page, but let me go back to this page first. Oh, one moment, I didn't hit save. Save. Okay, and now I should be able to go back and submit. And I have this error check complete. No errors have been found. I can submit the measure. So I would just click this button and the measure would go through. So what if I want to make a change to the information on a measure that I submitted? This could happen because a reviewer has gotten in touch with me and asked that I make a change, or it could happen because I noticed an error prior to the deadline of 8 p.m. Eastern on May 20th. So if a reviewer has a question that I need to respond to or a comment I need to address, I will receive an email from the system. And I would go into my submissions, and I can see here that this is the submitted measure that I'm going to work with. I can see here that there is indeed a comment and a request for me to provide a more descriptive title. So perhaps what I input is too similar to another existing measure, and I want to differentiate my measure from that other measure. In order to make that change and respond to that request for a change, I go up to the top and I can see that there is a request change button. So I'm going to click that. And you can see that I now have a change request pencil button for each individual field in the system. So I was asked to change the measure title. And I have now a place to put my new value and a reason for that change request. So I'm going to put the new value as new and improved measure title. And I'm going to put the reason for that change request, measure manager request to revise title. And then I can submit that change request. And I get this pop-up telling me that all change requests are subject to review and approval by CMS program management. I'm going to accept that and hit submit. Great. So the individual who requested that change will receive an email notification, and then they'll be able to accept or reject the change and move the measure along to the next step in the review process. After I've made the change, I can also go back to my submissions, and I could respond to the request here as well. The title has been revised. Thank you. And I'll save that. Great. So after I've made that change, my measure's been submitted. What if I want to take a look at my submission? You can do that in a couple of ways. One is to use this view full icon. And this enables you to page through your entire submission. So you can actually navigate through the whole tool and see the answers you've selected. The other option is to use this export functionality. This will produce an Excel file with each column representing a different measure information field, and you can download it and save it for your records. If you are submitting multiple measures, each one will show up in your export on its own row. So that concludes my demonstration of merit. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and take us back to the slide deck to talk about where you can find help resources if you need assistance with merit. Okay, I'm back to the slide presentation. And as I mentioned, the Quick Start Guide is downloadable from that login page. It's also available on the Pre-Rulemaking website. That is a handy resource that will cover all of what I showed today and more. And I recommend checking that out. Additionally, there is that Word template that you can download from the login page, as well as within the tool and the Pre-Rulemaking website that contains all the CMS merit fields and measure field guidance for you to fill out in advance if you wish. and it contains the exact same information you'll see within the tool. Additionally, we encourage you to contact the Measures Management System support team at mmssupport@patel.org, and you can contact us there for questions about MUC list requirements, as well as any technical issues you might experience with CMS Merit. And lastly, although it's not on this slide, I do encourage you to visit the CMS pre-rulemaking website for information about this year's pre-rulemaking cycle. And we'll put a link to that in the chat. And that's where you can find a number of resources at the bottom of the page, including those that we've mentioned today.